Amen. Okay, so here we are in Genesis chapter 19. We left off last week in Genesis chapter 18. In chapter 18, Abraham was visited by three men. Okay, and it turns out that one of the men were God, and the other two were angels. And we talked about why this visitation from God had to have been a Christophany, an appearance of Christ in the Old Testament. Basically, in one sentence, no man can stand before the Father and live. All right? Therefore, the Son is the physical representation of God so that man can see God and live and not get burned up. All right? And that's what his sacrifice does for all of us. And that's why the Bible tells us that we can now boldly go before the throne. We don't have to worry about being burned to a crisp when we go before the throne of God. And that's because of the work of Jesus. Amen? Now, that only applies to the believers. And, I think about that, and I think about Judgment Day, and, it won't be like God gathers all the unbelievers before the throne, and then they all just go poof. Right? But even worse, they get cast into the lake of fire for all of eternity. All right? So in that sense, you could say the Jehovah's Witnesses, they have maybe, in earthly terms, a more compassionate take because they believe in eternal destruction, where the unbelievers will die forever and they'll cease to exist. But we know that's not the case, because if believers will exist continuously for all of eternity in the presence of God in heaven, then it serves that the unbelievers will exist forever in the presence of God in hell. All right? Okay, so that happened, and God affirmed to Abraham, and especially to Sarah, the covenant of righteousness through faith, and that he would give them a child. Abram is now 98 years old or 99 years old, and Sarah is 89 years old. All right, so naturally she laughed, and God said, "Why are you laughing?" She said, "I didn't laugh." Like, oh, God's going to go, "Oh, I thought I heard you laugh. My apologies." No, God knows. So God knew he laughed. And he basically told her, "You will name your son Isaac," which means laughter. And we talked about how that is applied to Sarah in the sense that she mocked God. And that her laughter is now existing as the son she did not believe he could give her. Later on, she also applies the positive aspect of that to Isaac, that now he brings her laughter. In other words, he's a blessing, and she is blessed because of Isaac in the presence of all the other women. Okay? And then God sends the two angels off to Sodom. All right? And that's where we leave off. So Abram, God ascends. Right? Remember we talked about that? He left Abraham. He ascended, which was so points to Christ, And the other two angels now go to Sodom. Who lives in Sodom? Lot. Abraham's nephew. Lot. Okay? Who is a man of God. All right? Imperfect, as we're going to see. Just like Abraham. And that's one of the cool things I really drew out tonight from my study this afternoon, was that Lot, his sin is really no worse than Abraham's sin, what he did with Sarah. Both of their sin is really no worse than us. So rather than mocking what Lot did, which we're going to see, or, looking down on Lot for what he did, I tend to look at these things as comforting to me that these guys did this, and yet Lot is still called a righteous man in God's sight. Abraham is still a righteous man. And it's not because they're worthy or they're deserving, it's because they believe. Amen? Abraham believed, and it was counted to him for righteousness. What did he believe? He believed in the coming of Messiah. He believed in God, obviously, but every Jew believes in God. Right? But he believed in Messiah, in the coming of Messiah. So these two angels arrive in Sodom, and Lot, as we see, is now sitting in the gate. So who wants to read verses 1 through 5?
Yeah.
Anyone? May, go ahead.
Oh, before you read, can I say something?
Yes, go ahead, Ken.
When I was reading it, what stuck out for me, and how, like you said, it brings us to being in the same situation, is how Abraham interceded for Lot. You know, like we would intercede for somebody and pray for them and pray to the Lord for that individual. And Lot being where he was, it's kind of like this, like a flesh Christian, you know, in the way he was inside that city, and probably doing a lot of business and whatever, and drifted away a little bit because he was actually out in the field out there in the area, and then he got probably, you know, what's going on over there in that city. In a sense, but I mean, that's just off the record. But I just like the way Abraham interceded for Lot, and I think that's how we do it in our prayers sometimes, right?
Sure. And he didn't just intercede for Lot, he interceded for the whole, all the cities. And that was that whole discourse he had with God in chapter 18. Well, what if we find 50 righteous people? Will you destroy the evil, the good with the evil? And God said, look, if I find 50, I'll spare them all. How about 45, God? What about 40? God's like, okay, 45. How about 40? And he whittled it all the way down to 10. And God said, look, if I find 10 righteous people in Sodom, I will not destroy any of the cities. How many righteous people, in the end, if you've all read this before, those of you who have, how many righteous people in the end were there?
3.
I would say 3. And this doesn't speak of the sin of Lot's daughters, which we'll get to. But at least they didn't get turned to pillars of salt. And we're going to see when Lot's wife turns around, it's saying something. And I don't want to talk about it now. I want to wait till we get there. But it's really deep, man. And it's really, when I investigated why salt, why did she look back, and why did she get turned into a pillar of salt? And there's historical record of this pillar existing, by the way, which we'll get to when we get to it. All right, so May, go ahead and read 1 through 5, and let's get going.
1 through 5. The 2 angels came to Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting in the gate of Sodom. When Lot saw them, he rose to meet them and bowed himself with his face to the earth and said, "My lords, please turn aside to your servant's house and spend the night and wash your feet. Then you may rise up early and go on your way." They said, "No, we will spend the night in the town square." But he pressed them strongly, so they turned aside to him and entered his house. And he made them a feast and baked unleavened bread, and they ate.
Praise God.
But before they lay down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, both young and old, all the people to the last man, surrounded the house.
Okay, good. Oh, wait, no, yeah, go ahead. I said 5, right?
Yeah. And they called Lot, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us that we may know them."
Okay, and it begins. All right, so the 2 angels came to Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting in the gate of Sodom. Okay, what does that mean? Like, what is that telling us? Lot is sitting in the gate of Sodom. Does anybody know what that implies? Go ahead,
That
May.
he was an official of some sort.
Yeah, you guys speak into the microphone, but yes.
That he was an official of some sort and
Yes.
had business there.
Yeah, and you're right. He was appointed. Now we have no real record of this. The rabbis who write the Targums, which are, if you remember, are commentaries. These are ancient rabbis who wrote commentaries on the scriptures. They wrote that there were judges appointed in Sodom, and that Lot was one of the judges. All right, and I believe this is true, and I'm going to get to the evidence why as we get to it. All right, so. We open up 19, and there's 2 angels and no longer 3 men. And it's very interesting because the angels are in the appearance of men, all right? So in verse 1, it calls them angels. And then it never does again until like verse 18 or 19. And only 2 times in chapter 19, but only 2 times in chapter 19 are the men addressed as angels. The rest of the time, they're addressed as men. And I think the reason is because most of the time they're acting in the capacity of men, not in the capacity of angels. But that doesn't really apply here in verse 1 because they're acting in the capacity of men in verse 1, yet they're called angels. And I think the reason why it says angels there is twofold. One is because, remember we had the whole debate in chapter 18 about who these men were. We knew the Lord was one of them. But was it, remember I told you when I was a young Christian, I wrote that it was a manifestation of the Trinity. Right. Which it wasn't. There's no, what's the word? There's no, it doesn't happen. So we can't say that's what it is. It doesn't happen anywhere in the Bible. All right? And then in chapter 19, it says the two angels. I'm like, oh, it's not a manifestation of a Trinity. It's two angels and God. They were very close to God. Their thoughts were really one and the same, but they don't have the attributes of God. They're not everywhere at once. They don't know everything, right? They don't have none of the omni characteristics of God. Yes, Donald.
Could they possibly be the archangels?
Anything's possible. It's not stated though. Anything's possible. And I mean,
okay.
There's no precedent for only archangels doing what these two angels have come to do. But by all means, they certainly could be. They could be cherubim. The cherubim are known as the angels who are closest to the throne of God. Okay? But whatever, that's all speculation. So Lot is acting in the capacity of a judge. And what the judges would do is they would sit in the gate of the city or the town. Or maybe they would sit, because there's more than one way into a city. So they would sit at the various gates. And the locals in that area, if they had disputes, they could go to that judge at the gate and have a discussion with them. And he would resolve the dispute. And his decision was binding, legally. They were appointed. They were like magistrates, And I never really considered this before, but and some of the commentators don't agree, and some of them do. But I think that it's true because later on, and look at verse 9 real quick. This is all the men who want to have sex with these angels. They reply, this fellow Lot came to sojourn here, and he has become the judge. Now we will deal worse with you than with them. In other words, they're the ones bringing up being a judge. And so that kind of feeds into the whole idea that maybe this guy really was appointed a judge, and that's probably where the rabbinical commentators got the idea and decided that was the case. And I agree. Okay, so when Lot saw them, he rose to meet them and bowed himself with his face to the earth. Why would he do that?
Honor and respect, Brother Chris.
Honor and respect, May? Honor and respect. Anyone else?
Yes, sir.
Not because they're angels?
No, hospitality.
Exactly. Thank you, Gail.
She took the word.
Exactly. There is no indication that they look like angels.
You're right.
They're men. All right? They were men in chapter 18, and they're men in chapter 19, even with verse 1 saying they're angels. Go ahead, Ken. Use the mic. There's two mics on that table, Ken, just so you know.
Even though they didn't appear to Lot as angels, they were. And when he bowed down, wouldn't they have said, no, don't do that, if they were angels?
Well, they were angels, but he wasn't bowing down to worship.
Oh, okay.
He was doing what Jewish custom is, and that's when when a person arrives that they don't know, who appears to be a person of high station, that is the sign of respect they give. All right, and that's what he was doing.
You know what the Lord said to me? He said, Brother Chris, he said, when people come to people's house, they wash their feet when they come in as honor. When they come in the door, they wash their feet and bow down.
Well, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
When you in ancient Israel, when you went to someone's house as the guest, somebody would wash your feet.
He told me that, brother, just now.
Yeah.
Just
Well,
now.
it's in the Bible. Yeah. All right. So if it wasn't in the Bible, I would have told you, brother, that's not in the Bible.
I know you would, brother.
All right. So Lot is sitting in the gate. It's a term used of judges. I already spoke about that. So when Lot saw them, he rose to meet them and bowed himself with his face to the earth. It's not to say that Lot saw angels approaching and bowed respectfully. It's showing that he was bowing respectfully for persons who were clearly of high station. What does that mean? Well, they didn't show up looking like vagabonds. They were clean. They were probably dressed nicely to give Lot the impression these were people. All right, whether that's right or wrong, that's another argument. But all right, so then in after bowing, he says, "My lords, please turn aside to your servant's house and spend the night and wash your feet. Then you may rise up early and go on your way." They said, "No, we will spend the night in the town square." Now, to me, that verifies everything we've been saying all along. These guys appear to be men of high station. Lot is inviting them to stay at his house. A leader, right, a judge, is telling these individuals, "Come stay at my house." So they must have the appearance, and he calls them my lords as well. All right? So they obviously look high up. All right? And the angels respond, the men respond, "No, we will spend the night in the town square." Now, that's not so unusual, all right? But it's also not very safe, and Lot knows this. And so why would, turn aside, spend the night and wash your feet. No, we will spend the night in the town square, all right? Verse 3, but he pressed them strongly. There's our first clue that something is amiss. Anybody could go and stay in the town square. It's not uncommon, right? But he is very adamant with them. You don't want to do that. You probably haven't heard of this city.
A bunch of weirdos.
You know? Homosexuality is rampant. And not just homosexuality, but rape. All right? Because really, we're talking about two things here in this chapter, homosexuality and rape. And it's applied in two cases in this chapter. All right? All right, so he pressed them strongly, so they turned aside to him and entered his house. And he made them a feast and baked unleavened bread, and they ate. The word for feast here is the word in Hebrew, misteh. And it's distinguished from the word translated as a meal, which in Hebrew is the word lehem. The difference seems to be in its grandness, where a feast is more than just a simple meal. All right, if these were just a bunch of dudes and he invited them to stay at his house, he might have prepared a meal for them. But he's preparing a feast for these guys. And this word feast, misteh, also implies drinking wine. That's like actually the main concept being conveyed, that it's a feast marked by the drinking of wine. So he's going to pull out the stops for these guys, basically. That's what he's saying. All right? So it's somewhat of a banquet with wine as the central treat. So he wants to bless them, right? But before they lay down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, both young and old, all the people to the last man surrounded the house. And I didn't do something obvious here, and let's look up the word Sodom. Let me do that real fast. Their secret is what the word Sodom means. Okay, so before they lay down, so what time of the day is it? Nighttime, right? The men of Sodom, both young and old. All right, so if it's nighttime and he made them a feast, that means that they arrived at his house sometime earlier for all this work to be done to prepare the food, for them to eat, for them to converse, fellowship, say, all right, I think it's getting late. We should think about going to bed, and there's a knock at the door. Or there's a screaming coming from outside the door. Both young and old, the men of Sodom, all the people to the last man surrounded the house. So it's the men. All right, this isn't a generic term for the people. This is the men of Sodom. Word must have spread, because they met him at the gate. There were people at the gate. There were people who were homosexuals at the gate who were part of this crowd, and the word spread that he invited these two hot guys and back to the house. So now they arrive, and they say in verse 5, where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us that we may know them. All right, so the suggestion here obviously is bad intentions, right? It's doubtful that every single male actually came. All right, I honestly don't believe that every single male in the city came. I think what's being expressed here is that this illness of sin was widespread and that a lot of people showed up. And it wasn't something that was looked down upon or unaccepted among the majority of people in Sodom. Because if there was any amount of people who did object, God wouldn't have destroyed Sodom. This was a cultural, acceptable thing in this city, as depraved as it is. Because we're not just talking about homosexuality. We're talking about rape. All right?
Dr. Chris.
Yeah.
If you want to, you've already got this in your notes, but there's a list of the sins of Sodom and Ezekiel.
Right.
Chapter 16, 49, verse 49 and 50.
Well, go ahead and read it.
Okay. Behold, this was the guilt of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters had pride, excess of food, prosperous ease, that would be idleness, but did not aid the poor and the needy. They were haughty and did abominations before me, so I removed them when I saw them.
Right, and obviously homosexuality and rape are the two abominations. There may very well have been more. They might have been pagans, for all I know. I have no idea. But those were the homosexuality is what they're called out for. All right. Okay. The other thing you need to know. So it's doubtful that every single male actually came, and I find this to be more of a statement of the universal depravity and rampant homosexuality of the men of Sodom and Gomorrah. But there's two other cities that we're not mentioning. And they're the cities named Admah and Zeboim. All right? I'm going to read to you Jeremiah 49:18. It says this: As when Sodom and Gomorrah and their neighboring cities were overthrown, says the Lord, no man shall dwell there, no man shall sojourn there. Deuteronomy 29:23. The whole land burned with brimstone and salt, nothing sown and nothing growing, where no plant can sprout, an overthrow like that of Sodom and Gomorrah, Admah and Zeboim, which the Lord overthrew in his anger and wrath. And that's really all we hear about those other two cities. We don't have any other historical record of them, all right? But I always find it interesting, we don't really hear anything about Gomorrah either. And yet, we know about Sodom and Gomorrah, not so much about Admah and Zeboim. All right, weird. Okay, so in verse 5, these two angels appeared not as angels, but human men, being seen as human men. The men of Sodom said that we may know them. They wanted to know men. All right? They weren't saying, bring out the angels so we can have sex with them. Do you understand? Do you see that? Okay. That we may know them, which is how it's also expressed in the King James. The word know in Hebrew is yada, just like it sounds, Y-A-D-A, yada, 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 right? Which I find very interesting that became a colloquial phrase. When in Hebrew it means sex, 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 you know. So it's a verb meaning to know, to learn, to perceive, to discern, to experience, to confess, to consider, to know people relationally, to know how, and to be skillful, and to be made known, to make oneself known, and to make to know. It's not exclusively a word for sex. It's one of the applications that is clearly the application in this chapter. All the commentators agree its usage here is sexual in nature. All right, a la Genesis 4:1 and 1 Kings 1:4, which say this. Genesis 4:1. Now Adam knew Eve, his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain, saying, I have gotten a man with the help of the Lord. A clear sexual implication, that they had intercourse and they procreated. 1 Kings 1:4. The young woman was very beautiful, and she was of service to the king and attended to him, but the king knew her not. All right. The NASB Bible reads this: bring them out to us that we may have relations with them. Another word for sex. The NIV and the NLT Bibles read, bring them out to us so that we can have sex with them. They don't mince words, right? And that's really one of the benefits of the NIV and the NLT. I prefer the NLT way, way more than the NIV. The NLT is written in a very modern vernacular. What you lose with them is you don't learn. You don't read the King James and go, well, what does the word no mean? And look it up, because it's telling you right there, it's sex. So it kind of stunts your learning in a way. That's why I never use the NLT as my sole Bible study tool. I always use it as a companion to the ESV, which is a literal interpretation of the Bible. All right?
Pastor Chris?
Yeah.
I just looked up the definition for Gomorrah. It's a wicked or depraved place.
And it was. Thank you. All right, so who wants to read 6 to 11?
So Lot stepped outside to talk to them, shutting the door behind him. Please, my brothers, he begged, don't do such a wicked thing. Look, I have 2 virgin daughters. Let me bring them out to you, and you can do with them as you wish. But please, leave these men alone, for they are my guests, and are under my protection. Stand back, they shouted. This fellow came to town as an outsider, and now he's acting like our judge. We'll treat you far worse than those other men. And they launched toward Lot to break down the door. But the 2 angels, reached out, pulled Lot into the house, and bolted the door. Then they blinded all the men, young and old, who were at the door of the house. So they gave up trying to get inside.
Okay, I find that interesting. Your Bible interpreted it saying the 2 angels, and that's the wrong word. And they were trying to be clear, but they actually muddied the waters by using the word angels, because the word for angel is malach. And the word for men used here is ish. So they were wrong to interpret that as angels, but it's not a big deal. We know that they're both. And see, the reason I say it's wrong is because the emphasis here is not on their angelic character. What they're doing is the actions of men, people in bodies, all right? They reached out their hands, they brought Lot into the house with them and shut the door. It's appealing to their natural state, not to their angelic. Now, in verse 11, it's now going to speak of their angelic station, because they struck the men with blindness, all right? What verse did we read to? 11, right? 11. Okay. All right, so Lot shuts the door after or behind him. He is concerned enough that he has them lock the door behind him. So Lot knows these people, and he knows what they're capable of, and he's worried, all right? In verses 6 to 8, Lot offers the homosexuals, his 2 daughters, to do with as they please. Okay, let's talk about this a little bit. I don't think it was a bluff.
May I say something on that?
Yeah, ma'am.
We already know that the angels, or the men, as he probably didn't know they were angels at that time, were under his protection. You would think that as a dad,
Yeah.
his children would be under his protection. So I don't understand why he would offer his daughters up. It just seems a cruel thing to do.
And it is.
I think he
Go ahead.
I think he knew that they were homosexual and wouldn't want them anyways.
Well, then what's the point?
He knew that
I think that he was
was going to try anything to get them to stop surrounding the house. In my version right here, it says, before bedtime, men, both young and old, from every part of Sodom surrounded Lot's house. They called to Lot, where are the two men that came to you tonight? Bring them out to us so we can have sexual relations with them. So it specifically says that in this one. I know, baby. But I think he was just scared, and he knew that they were of God and didn't want them to get hurt and evil things to be done to them.
Right, and I agree with what you're saying. I think that Lot found himself between a rock and a hard place. I think in Lot's mind, he measured rape against rape and murder and acted in sin. What did Abraham do when they went into a city and he was worried that they would get persecuted? To be what? What was going to happen to her? She's going to be raped. Now, the person doing it wouldn't necessarily know that that's what he was doing because he's taking her in as his wife. But Abraham is virtually, basically giving not only his sister, because they were half brother and sister, but his wife to another man. And when that other man has sex with him, in God's eyes, and I'm sure in Sarah's eyes, she was being raped. So what Lot did here is no worse than what Abraham did, other than it being two women instead of one. All right? And I know you don't get it, but realize you're not in this time and you're not in this custom. But understand this, you're no better. Right? Your sin would send you to hell just as quickly as Lot's sin or Abraham's.
Yep.
Right?
So true.
And your righteousness spares you from that in the same exact way. You know, God could have held this against him after it was all over and said, Lot, well, we're going to have a talk here and, you know, off with your head, because how dare you do that? And he could have did that to Abraham as well. And I think that's what's so reassuring about this, not that it's giving us an excuse or to make light of the sin, because you should never make light of the sin in your lives, but we have to realize that as God's children, we can go before the throne and repent. And that it is our faith that makes us righteous. It's not how good we are. Which is such a relief to me, because I know I can go back to the Father if I've messed up. I can repent. That's the key. It's all in repentance. That's why I talk about it a lot. It's not in just going, oh, I sinned. I'm sorry, God. Now I can keep sinning. Oh, I'm sorry, God. Now, it's like, you know, repenting, putting it down like you're in a battle. And, you know, like addicts are in a battle. And when an addict says to God, I repent, it doesn't mean they're never going to sin again. What it does mean is that they will mourn their sin and that they will hate their sin and that they will repent. What is it? How many times is God going to forgive them?
7 times.
Exactly. That's what gives God the right to put that kind of standard on us in forgiving others. 70 times 7. Because he knows how flawed we are. You know, this is a heinous thing that Lot's doing. I'm not going to make light of it, all right? I mean, he's willing to allow his 2 daughters to get raped, his 2 virgin daughters to get raped, to spare these 2 men, all right? So Lot's response, this is John MacArthur's commentary here. Lot's response betrayed tension in his ethics. I don't know.
Basically means that he normally wouldn't act like that or be involved in any kind of evil that existed in the city. But due to his fear, he fell to you know, doing that.
Yep. And I'm sure that's correct. You know, he was under a lot of pressure. And, I mean, obviously, let's not use the exact choices and circumstances to ask this question, but how many of us, when we were under a lot of pressure, have made a wrong decision? Right?
Everybody raise your hands. Raise them up.
So really, that's one of the lessons staring us right here in the face.
You're right, Rutger.
You know, and that you can still be forgiven for that mistake.
Thank God.
All right. MacArthur then quotes 2 Peter 2:6-7, which I'm going to read to you. And this is about Sodom and Gomorrah. Okay, so now we're going to see the New Testament speaking into what we're studying. All right. If by turning the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah to ashes, he, God, condemned them to extinction, making them an example of what is going to happen to the ungodly. Perry, I'm going to ask you that if you're going to cough, you cover your mouth.
I did.
All right? All right. If by turning the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah to ashes, he condemned them to extinction, making them an example of what is going to happen to the ungodly, and if he rescued righteous Lot, greatly distressed by the sensual conduct of the wicked. All right? So, Peter, the Apostle Peter, wrote 2,000 years ago these words, and what he's saying, that by turning the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah to ashes, God was making these cities, it's actually 4 cities, remember, an example of what is going to happen to the ungodly. So what is that telling us? That as we're reading this chapter about what's happening in Sodom and Gomorrah, what are we being taught about?
God's seriousness about sin.
Well, God's serious about the end time, the judgment, the final judgment, the fate of the wicked. That's what this is all about. The final judgment and the fate of the wicked. All right, so and then it says in 2 Peter 2:7, and if he rescued righteous Lot, who was greatly distressed by the sensual conduct of the wicked. So obviously, the word distressed here in the Greek is kataponeo, to labor, to pain, and to toil, to wear out or down by labor, to be weary and oppressed by. So the actions of Sodom wore greatly on him, adding to the pressure he was feeling when they wanted to rape these men, causing him to make a poor decision. And really, there was no good decision, unless God intervenes, which he always does, and he did. But, what are the looking through earthly eyes, what are the options? I give them my guests to get raped and probably murdered. I give them my daughters to get raped and probably murdered. I do nothing. They break down the door. They take the men and me, because remember, they're now going to do it to him too. There's no winning scenario here. All right, go ahead, Meg.
I was just going to say, notice he didn't offer himself up.
Can I go on to the next part of the John MacArthur study, because it might help?
Go ahead. Yeah, I probably stopped too soon. That's probably what I did. Go ahead.
It says, so then it says 19:8, do what you like with them. The constraints of Eastern hospitality and the very purpose for which Lot had invited the visitors in compelled Lot to offer his daughters for a less deviant, these men, for they have come, the less deviant kind of wickedness, so as to protect his guests. This foolish effort shows that while Lot was right with God, he had contented himself with some sins in weak faith rather than leaving Sodom in, but God was gracious to him because he was righteous by faith.
Right. That's good. It's a tough situation. And, we're looking at this situation through 21st century Utica eyes, whereas they're looking through it in first century Jewish eyes. Rich.
Pastor Chris.
Yeah, sure.
1 second, Ken.
Sure.
You keep turning it off. Just keep your hand off the button after it goes green.
Sure does show the blessings we have today, because you could find situations way worse than that.
Yeah. Go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, he's basically a carnal Christian now. He done walked away and pretty much in trusting God, where he was before, I guess, right?
No, I wouldn't say that, because, when you're talking about carnal Christianity, you're talking about people who are habitually doing things even after being saved. They're still being led compulsively and regularly by their carnal desires, and not exercising the power of the Holy Spirit to fight or overcome sin, whereas he just made a mistake. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Okay, so to me, again, it seems that to indicate that Lot was at wit's end in the situation, which had no good outcome. And I think this jives with what Mindy just read from MacArthur's commentary. How many of us understand the idea that we each can make poor choices under these kinds of circumstances, high-pressure circumstances and emotions, all right? I remember many times, and when I think about this, it applies mostly to when I was a kid in high school, in the hardest part of my life, and when I was in the cult, in Scientology. Having that feeling of a vice grip on my head. The pressure is so great, and you just feel like it's going to explode, and you have to make decisions, and you make wrong decisions. You know, he was stuck between a rock and a hard place. His choice was sinful, even if his logic was understandable intellectually, even if not agreed with. All right, and that's what MacArthur's trying to do, and Mindy read, trying to give us a logical explanation in Lot's mind of why he would do such a thing. Not that it's not sin, but so that we can, and you know, there's plenty of things that people reason out logically and then act that are not godly. So on the one hand, Lot may have been considering murder as something that might please these city men, just rape. On the other hand, he would allow the rape of his two own daughters, to spare the honor of these men? So,
Pastor Chris.
Yes.
It seems like this is a foreshadow in that he offered up his daughters, so later on, I know we haven't gotten it to it yet, it comes back on him in a way.
A foreshadow of what? Say that again.
Like, later in the chapter, his daughters get him drunk.
Oh.
Both of them. But he's offering them up, and then in return, God has them do that. I think this is more a foreshadow of things to come.
Well, that's an interesting concept. Hold that thought, and if I don't bring it up again, remind me when we get there, because that is interesting. All right, because, you know, his daughters end up, I mean, what they do is so wrong, and their whole line of reasoning is so wrong. And it's what we do. And I've spoken about it so many times, about how we will make clearly ungodly decisions, but we will dress up the pig to look like a Christian. Right? No, we're dedicating this work to the Lord, and you know, they're telling me this, and I'm like, this isn't of God. This is not of God. And we're going to do all these wonderful things, and you know, it's like, and you know, P.S. they go off and do their thing, and it all falls apart, you know, because it wasn't of God. Now, I'm not talking about rape, but that's what it's a picture of. It's a picture of people formulating plans that are not godly. And now, Lot's daughters, they're supposed to be believers. They could have inquired of the Lord, right? Yeah. They had these angels. Oh no, the angels were gone at that point. But they could have inquired. There's no mention of them praying to God or anything like that. They just went on their own. And I think what it's showing also, Donald, is a influence of Sodom on his family.
Yes.
All right, because his wife clearly is influenced by Sodom. And we'll get to that when we get to it. All right, let's keep going. So rather than be appalled,
thank you.
You're welcome. Take comfort in the thought that despite his own sinfulness, his lack of moral and spiritual perfection, Lot was still considered righteous. This is no excuse for sinful behaviors and actions, but know that when the man or woman of faith falls short in their decisions, logic, reasoning, and behaviors, we too can find reconciliation, forgiveness, and restoration through Christ. And it comes through repentance. You know, a true desire to stop doing these things, not just an excuse to continue doing them and still have grace. That's called licentiousness, when you have that kind of attitude, right? All right, so verse 9. But they said, stand back. And they said, this fellow came to sojourn, and he has become the judge. Now we will deal worse with you than with them. Then they pressed hard against the man Lot and drew near to break the door down. All right, so now picture this movie in your mind. Lot's outside begging them not to do this. And they say, you're going to talk, you don't even live here. I mean, you're not even a citizen. I don't know how they made you a judge, but you presume to judge us? We're going to do worse to you. You see, and that's why I introduced the whole idea of murder. What's worse than rape? They rape you, then they kill you. Right? We will deal worse with you than with these two men once we get our hands on them. Then they pressed hard against the man Lot. So now he's being pressed. He's now being pushed into the door. Because that's what he's guarding, is the doorway, right? The city men refuse, mocking Lot, that he, an outsider to Sodom, the sojourner, this temporary dweller, that's what a sojourner is. He's passing through. Whether he's staying for a year, a month, a year, 5 years, 7 years, he's not staying forever. All right? Would presume to judge over the actions of the natives of Sodom. The various translations seem to indicate that Lot indeed was involved in acting legally as a judge of Sodom at the time. Further, they now inform Lot that he too would become part of their lustful, depraved actions, and not just limited to sexual, homosexual rape. All right, something worse, which I would say is probably murder. All right. All right, so they proceeded to the door, backing Lot into it with the intention of breaking it down and taking those inside by force and raping them. At least the girls weren't going to get raped, right? Go ahead, May.
Pastor, sometimes though, you say murder and the possibility is there, but sometimes there's worse things you can do than kill somebody. Because at least if a person is gone, they're not going to suffer. But if these people are going to do worse...
Well, what we're doing on that aspect is speculating, yeah. So, What we do know is that they said they do worse. All right? And we went to verse 11, right? Okay, but the men reached out their hands. What men? The angels. Reached out their hands and brought Lot into the house with them and shut the door. Okay, so the men in verse 10, Lot is rescued by the angels, who as men open the door and quickly pull him inside, again shutting and locking the door. There is nothing supernatural about any of this yet, until now. Verse 11, and they struck with blindness the men who were at the entrance of the house. Okay, so these are angels. This isn't God. But we also know that they're empowered to act supernaturally, aren't they? All right? Whether they were commissioned by God just for this one instance to do this, I don't think so, because God sent them to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, not necessarily strike these guys with blindness. I think that was their own capability that they had as angels, all right, of God. So the angels strike the city men with blindness, every single one of them, small and great, in the presence of Lot's house. They protect their party. All right, so the angels protect Lot. All right, and his family. And I have 4 verses about this. 1 Samuel 2:9. He will guard the feet of his faithful ones, but the wicked shall be cut off in darkness, for not by might shall a man prevail. He will guard the feet of his faithful ones, but the wicked shall be cut off in darkness, for not by might shall men prevail. Now, me as a believer in Jesus Christ, I'm a competent guy. I can prevail in things without calling on God. That's not really glorifying the Lord, is it? See, I would call that sinful. If I am not going to ask the Lord for strength before I act, or wisdom, and then after I'm done, thank him, I'm acting out of my flesh, aren't I? Right? That's not what this is talking about. He's talking about, he's doing a contrast between faithful ones and the wicked. He will guard the feet of his faithful ones, but the wicked ones shall be cut off in darkness, for not by might shall a man prevail. The wicked ones always have to go in their human might. What else are they going to draw in? Well, maybe they'll draw in dark spirits. But this is all wickedness. All right? And will end in them being in darkness. Psalm 4:8. In peace, both lie down and sleep. For you alone, O Lord, make me dwell in safety. Which I could have just used the second half of that scripture. But for Ken Holden's sake, I used the whole scripture. He knows what I'm talking about. Love you, brother. In peace I will both lie down and sleep. For you alone, O Lord, make me dwell in safety. All right? Now, there's a scripture of faith in God. You know, and well, let me finish this last verse before I say what I'm about to say. Psalm 34, verse 7 through 9. The angel of the Lord encamps around those who fear him and delivers them. O taste and see that the Lord is good. Blessed is the man who takes refuge in him. O fear the Lord, you his saints, for those who fear him have no lack. You see, the unbeliever does not understand who God is and have no fear of him. The believer in Christ and God is marked first and foremost by a healthy fear of God. And the way you get a fear of the Lord, I'm not talking about Freddy Krueger terror. I'm talking about when you understand who God is. You reverence him in fear.
Amen to that, brother. Amen.
And you thank your lucky stars that you are counted with his children.
You're right.
When you read about the fate of the ungodly. Right? The angel of the Lord encamps around those who fear him and delivers them. O taste and see that the Lord is good. Blessed is the man who takes refuge in him. O fear the Lord, you saints. Those who fear him have no lack. Here's the thing with those two scriptures, actually with all three. Here, the angels deliver Lot. Then the angels deliver Lot from the city. All right? And he delivers Lot's wife and Lot's 2 children. But only 3 of them make it into Zoar. Even though the promise was for the 4 of them. All right? 2 points. The first one is, you have a free will, child of God. And you can choose to walk away. And there are plenty of people who do. Now, in the end, we can have the debate, well, were they ever really saved to begin with? How can somebody who's saved, I said this last night in prayer, how can you meet the living God and walk away? I mean, I don't know how you do that. But there are plenty of people who claim to have met him who do walk away. I don't claim to know these things, the wise. I'll ask God when I see him. And stick close to God. The second point, let me just make this other point, is these promises for us are not promises that God's going to deliver you from every earthly trial you go through. All right, ask any of the Christian martyrs, and they will tell you God does not always deliver you from the crucifix, from the fire stake, from the Muslim extremist. All right, what does he deliver you into? Exactly, eternal life. That's the promise. Go ahead, mate.
I just wanted to say that I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that there were 2 more that were asked to go, and those were the betrothed of the...
Yeah, I don't want to... we're going to have this conversation. Here's the question. Were there 2 daughters or 4?
Was there 2
What?
before you said, Brother?
It was 4.
Were there 2 daughters or 4? Well, you read MacArthur. See, I know that. Were there 2 daughters or 4? You see, I interpreted this all the way down to the women having sex with their father and reading commentaries before the light went on and said, I think there was 4 daughters.
No.
Yep.
Were they really though? I always thought it was 2, Brother Chris.
Well, I'll stop it. Let me see. Well, we didn't get there yet, so I don't want to get there. But when we get to the part with him going and talking to the sons-in-laws, we'll go over this. Gotcha. All right? And we'll address what you're saying, too. Gotcha. All right, so the promises of our safety are eternal promises. They are not necessarily, as New Testament believers, a temporal promise. We may die for the cross.
You're right, Brother Chris. It's so true.
All right. All right, so verse 11. And they struck with blindness the men who were at the entrance of the house, both small and great, so that they wore themselves out, groping at the door. Even in their blindness, they did not cease from their depravity. Picture you're in the middle of doing something, and all of a sudden you go blind. What's the first thing you do? Is it, how am I going to continue doing this? Someone help me continue doing this. No, you're going to be going, help, I'm blind. Right? What happened? Not these guys. They're groping around trying to find the door. And this is a statement on the sin of homosexuality. On the hold that it has on those who have given into that indulgence. See, here's the thing about homosexuality. Most people, I would say, at some point of their childhood, think about it. Whether it's just a fleeting thought, or you just learned about it, or saw what a homosexual is, or had it defined for you in school, and you have a best friend, and you contemplate it, and then for all of us sitting here, really didn't go any further. For others, it did go further. And to the degree that is entertained or fed, it gains a stronghold. And when the sin of homosexuality is particularly pointed out here, when homosexuality is fed and it gets that stronghold, it is a strong, strong, stronghold. All right? And it's being illustrated here by these blind men. That not even blindness will stop them from wanting to feed their flesh. Go ahead, Rich.
Do you consider the possibility that they could even be demons? Because the angels were related to as men, and so just their desire to just be blind and still go through the door, that's beyond.
Well, I wouldn't say they're demons, because I think the application here is more for as a teaching and a warning to us as people of the possibilities that we as fallen creatures have before us for either sin, either holiness or sinfulness. I will give you this. They're certainly influenced by the demonic. You know what I mean? As all of these addictions and ungodly behaviors are fostered by the demonic. All right? They're doorways. Okay?
And the more that the society is accepting it, the more people are...
It's getting stronger and stronger.
Yeah.
It's a stronger, stronger stronghold. I mean, we are becoming Sodom and Gomorrah. I mean, I don't think there's any point in time you could say that was any less true than today.
Rome.
Oh yeah, and he did destroy Rome. So yeah, you're right. You're right. Which does not bode well for us here in the United States. Or just in the unsaved world in general, these days. So anyway, they wanted sex and would have it with or without sight. Go ahead, Amanda.
Oh, no, it's done. Just a little tidbit on that, or just something. I don't think it's necessarily specific to homosexuality where you get a hold on. I think any sin you could potentially have that hold on. And I think sexual sins in general tend to be ones that give you the greatest hold, whether it be homosexuality, pornography, or...
Right, that's what I just said that.
Sorry.
Yeah. I mean...
Mine's knocked up, so I couldn't hear the whole
Oh, okay. The focus here is homosexuality, but certain, and I think it stands out among the sins as something that's a very strong stronghold. Maybe more so than pornography and, drug addiction. I don't know, but it seems to be singled out in the Bible. All right?
Agreed.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm having trouble finding my words tonight. It's one of those needs, one of those sinful needs that must be fulfilled no matter the cost. That it gets a person to that state. And again, I agree with Donald. See, I could say that about heroin. What will a heroin addict who's jonesying for a fix do to get that fix? Almost anything, if not anything, right? All right. Okay, 12 to 17. Who wants to read?
Then the men said to Lot, "Have you anyone else here? Sons-in-laws, sons, daughters, or anyone you have in the city? Bring them out of the place. For we are about to destroy this place, because the outcry against its people has become great before the Lord, and the Lord has sent us to destroy it." So Lot went out and said to his sons-in-law, who were to marry his daughters, "Up, get out of this place, for the Lord is about to destroy the city." But he seemed to his son-in-laws to be jesting. When morning dawned, the angels urged Lot, saying, "Arise, take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, lest you be consumed in the punishment of the city." But he lingered. So the men seized him and his wife and his 2 daughters by the hand. And the Lord, being merciful to him, and they brought him forth and set him outside of the city. 17 as well?
Yes.
And when they had brought them forth, they said, "Flee for your life. Do not look back or stop anywhere in the valley. Flee to the hills, lest you be consumed."
Okay, so verse 12, the men said to Lot, "Have you anyone else here? Sons-in-law, sons, daughters, or anyone you have in the city, bring them out of the place." These men are not God. If they were God, they would have known the answer to that question. All right? So that's just a further clarification that these are simply angels, ministers of God. All right? Regardless of... okay. Wait a second. Spelling error. Regardless of how unified they are with God in thought and speech, and we went over that last week about how they seemed to speak together when the angels were with God. When they spoke to Abraham several times, they spoke like in unison. Regardless of how unified they are with God in thought and speech, they do not have the omniscience of God and therefore must inquire of Lot to get this information. For we are about to destroy this place because of the outcry against its people. Because the outcry against its people has become great before the Lord, and the Lord has sent us to destroy it. So God knows. God knew when he was entertaining Abraham's intercessions, asking him if there were 40 righteous, 30 righteous, 20 righteous. God knows how many righteous there are. So he knew before he spoke to Abraham, he knew while he was speaking to Abraham, and he knew after he was speaking to Abraham, he was going to be destroying Sodom. All right. Now, what he was providing for really was free will.
Yes, you're right. Just like today.
But, Sodom chose to hate God. What else? We were about to destroy this. Because the outcry against its people has become great before the Lord. Can anyone explain that?
It's patience. When, it has a limited patience,
Well, the outcry of whom against its people?
People's prayers to God.
Well, again, it's not a righteous city. They're not praying.
The people that are getting hurt are praying to God and saying, "Oh God,
Maybe.
this isn't happening."
Maybe. What'd you say, May?
Victims.
Maybe there aren't many victims in a city that depraved.
Maybe they got slaves or captives.
Mm-hmm. Here's what I think. I think he's talking about the sins. They're rising, he sees everything. So the sins rise before his throne and stand in witness against them. All right? As well as, obviously, any victims who have been crying out to God for this. All right? The sins of Sodom here, I believe, are personified as if the sins themselves cry out to heaven and God on his throne. Nothing escapes God. He sees all, and all are a testimony before him. The sins call out for vengeance. The same type of language used here is used in Genesis 4:10 regarding Abel after Cain killed him. And the Lord said, "What have you done? The voice of your brother's blood is crying to me from the ground." Also Jeremiah 7:34, "And I will silence in the cities of Judah and in the streets of Jerusalem the voice of mirth and the voice of gladness." All right? So I think that's got a lot to do with what he's saying, that he sees it all. It's all risen up before him as a cry for justice. Because whose creation is it? Exactly. Exactly. All right, so he goes and tells the sons-in-laws, and here's what the ESV and the NASB say. He seemed to his sons-in-laws to be jesting. King James says, "But he seemed as one that mocked unto his sons-in-law." NIV and NLT, the modern versions, say, "But his sons-in-law thought he was joking." All right? Rather than heed Lot, the young men waved him off, dismissed the warning. Lot must have told them to meet him at his house and return there, because in verse 15, the narrative picks up again at his house. So we see Lot, the guys get blinded. Lot's able to get out. He goes, he evades everybody, and gets to his son-in-law's houses, or house. Maybe they live next to each other. Exhorts them, begs them to come, and they laugh at him, basically. They say, I think you've been drinking a little too much wine, and anyway, he says, "Please come and meet me at the house," and he goes back. Let's talk about his daughters. Verse 14. So Lot went out and said to his sons-in-law, who were to marry his daughters. All right? So I didn't catch what I'm going to be teaching now yet. I didn't catch that, like I said, later on until we got to the virgin daughters having sex with Lot, and I studied that out. And there is the concept in Jewish custom, culture, that if you are engaged, he is not just your betrothed, he is your husband, and you are his wife, even though you're not married yet. It's basically looked upon the same way. So the fact that it says sons-in-law could simply mean that they were engaged, and that's what the ESV translates it as, who were to marry his daughters, i.e. they're engaged. That means that the two daughters are virgins living with Lot. That's the two-daughter theory, all right? Here's the problem. Look at verse 15. As morning dawned, and angels urged Lot, saying, "Up, take your wife and your two daughters who are here." Meaning more. So you go back to verse 14 and you go, what does the King James say? And the King James says, "And Lot went out and spake unto his sons-in-law, which married his daughters." So the King James puts these two other daughters with the sons-in-law. It's been consummated. They're not virgins. The two living at home are virgins.
Wow, I never.
All right, NASB says, goes with the two-daughter theory. NIV goes with the two-daughter theory.
Can I make a speculation?
Hold on a second. And the NLT also goes with the two-daughter theory. So, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, so, and Fiddler on the Roof, which I know is just a movie, but...
Really?
Yes. Tevye, his oldest daughter, is pledged to marry Laser Wolf. He has to come up with this big elaborate scheme so the mother will be okay with the breaking of that. So it's almost like they're already married.
Right, I said that already.
He has to come up with this huge dream, and her dead aunt came in and all this stuff just so she pretty much won't kill him for breaking that vow. So I'm thinking, because this Bible says pledged to marry. So it was like there was already a dowry maybe exchanged or something like that where they were pledged to be married to that.
No, I understand all that. But that doesn't account for the four-daughter theory. Which John MacArthur, right here in the scriptures, when you study MacArthur, he's kind of saying what I'm saying. It could be one, could be the other. Later on down in verse, if you continue reading the MacArthur, you'll see in verse 30 to 30, 1, something like that, he pretty much lands on agreeing that it's 4 daughters. And the Jewish literature agrees it's 4 daughters.
Pastor Chris, I have a take on this which might change your mind. What they're doing is saying that instead of the daughters being with their fiancés, they were with Lot. By saying who were there.
Can't be because, oh no. Hold, say that again?
Like, this might be saying instead of being with their fiancés, they were with Lot at that time.
Well, that's the 2-daughter theory, of course, and they're virgins. Yeah. And here's your mistake, Donald. I'm not saying that's true, or I'm not committing to either theory. I'm just giving you all the information. You figure it out for yourself. If it clearly said it's this, then I would tell you it's this, regardless of what you believe. But what I'm saying here is that there isn't, in interpretation, in biblical interpretation, hermeneutics, there's this debate. Was it 2 daughters or 4? There is no lineage for Lot in the Bible. Lot's in the lineages, but not his lineage after him. Okay?
Nice.
Because it continues on through Abraham's lineage. So, but it's an interesting thing to see. All right? Huh?
I'm going to pray to the Lord about that, ask him.
Well, it's no big deal. That's the other thing you have to realize. It's no big deal. It doesn't change what's going to happen, all right? And it doesn't change the lesson. See, the sons-in-law do not show up. So when you get down to verse 31 and 32, it's basically saying the sons-in-laws and the daughters, if you're a 4th daughter theorist, died. And now there's only 2 daughters. So regardless of whether there's 2 daughters or 4 daughters, when we get to verse 31, there's 2 daughters. All right? And they're virgins. Okay. All right. So, verse 15. Anyway, the young men do not heed Lot. They wave him off. They dismiss the warning. He must have gone back to the house and was waiting. And it says as much in here. All right? Verse 15. As morning dawned, the angels urged Lot, saying, "Up, take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, lest you be swept away in the punishment of the city." They didn't say, "Listen, you have 48 hours. I really want you to think about this. We can wait. They may show up. But, at some point, you're going to have to, because, he's going to destroy them." They're like, "Up! What are you doing? Get out of here. God wants you spared. What are you doing?" Well, what is he doing? I mean, could he be mourning over his house? We know he's got a materialistic streak because when Abraham and Lot parted ways, Lot clearly saw the land and went, "Ooh, that's the good land." You know what I mean? But I don't think that's what it is. I think what he's doing is waiting for his sons-in-law, and that would be even strengthened more if you believe his 2 daughters of the 4 are there with them, those sons-in-laws. He doesn't want to see them die. I mean, it's a strong enough argument thinking there's just 2 daughters, because these are the guys these 2 women are in love with, right? So I believe that is what is causing Lot to linger. And it's time's up. The alarm's going off. They're like, there's no more time to wait. Verse 16, but he lingered. So the only other time in the Hebrew that the word angels is used, it's used in verse 15 and it's used in verse 1. That's it. The rest of the time the angels are referred to as men. And I found that, bless you, I found that he spoke of them as angels when they were doing angelic things. All right? They warned Lot that time is running out for them to escape Sodom and judgment. It's coming and time is short. Get out now. So the language they use in 15 is emphatic, right? What does emphatic mean? It means emphasis. It's with emphasis. I'm emphasizing. Karen, I'm emphasizing. You see what I'm saying? They're not going, "Hey, listen, dude, It's marked and spoken with emphasis, an urgent call to take immediate action. The punishment would be city-wide. If you are in the city, there is no escaping. The punishment would also be destructive in nature, as described by the words swept away. Swept away implies burnt to the ground. All right? In other words, what was there isn't there anymore. So that can happen in fires, that can happen in earthquakes, and that can happen when God rains fire and brimstone down on a city. All right? And that's exactly what happens. Verse 16, but he lingered. Lot did not obey with the immediacy the plea required. Sound like anybody? Anybody? Major decisions in your life? Sound like anybody? But I love him. I think I can make him a Christian. Right? And God's going, man, you better get out of there. But I love her. No one has ever loved me like she loved me. So she's a Satanist. The Bible is clear, and again, I can draw on the New Testament for this. We are not to be yoked to unbelievers. But that's not the final word either in the New Testament. It doesn't, if you are a Christian, you are not to get involved with an unbeliever in a relationship and marry them as an unbeliever. You are not, that is a sin. If you are an unbeliever and you are married to an unbeliever and you get saved, you are called to stay in that relationship as long as that other person will have you. Because they may get saved because of you. You don't know. If that person chooses to leave, then you are released from the vows of marriage. But he also says you should remain single. Okay, but that's a sermon for another day. All right, so what else do I have written down here? He waited for his sons-in-laws. He didn't want to leave his material gain. Maybe he instead prayed to God to spare the city. Maybe Lot was paralyzed by the haze of the shock of what was going on and unraveling around him. Remember, this is some heavy stuff going on. Clearly, at this point, Lot knows he's not dealing with just men. Right? This is new. Like Abraham, he's having all these Christophanies throughout the years. It's not happening to Lot. Right? So there's that. He's in shock. We don't know exactly why he's hesitating. My initial thoughts are that he's waiting for his sons-in-law and daughters, if in fact they were married. So the men seized him and his wife and his 2 daughters by the hand, and the Lord being merciful to him, and they brought him out and set him outside the city. Where am I? Okay, we're in verse 16. And I had you read the 17, right? Sometimes the Lord forces us to move.
Yes, you're right. It's true.
Lot didn't move on his own accord. The angels forced the situation. They took them by the hand and led them out. Maybe they were kicking and screaming. Right? How many of you remember, I've said this before, the meme on Facebook with God walking with this guy on the sand on the beach? And the guy goes, Lord, what are those 2 sets of footprints? And he goes, my child, that is when I walked with you. And he goes, but Lord, how come there's only 1 set of footprints there? And he goes, my son, that's when I dragged you. Being dragged means forced. You're going against your will. All right? And he will do that to his children. I always say, when you make a profession of faith and you get baptized, and I've seen plenty of people, they get baptized, and when you get baptized, here's the one thing you can expect 2 things: elation and trial. Elation because you're obedient to God, you did something the Bible called you to do, and you did it, and you're making that profession of faith, and it's public, and man, you're high. That's a high. It's a rush. And Satan knows there's another child of God. So generally, the trial comes pretty quickly. And many people who we baptize, they're gone. They're gone. But I always say to the person, when you are baptized, it's like marriage vows. You're like making a vow to God. A public that's what a marriage ceremony is. It's a public profession of unity between the bride, the groom, and God. And it's a public statement. Baptism's the same thing. Right? I think God's pretty faithful, isn't he? That if he has to drag you through trouble after trouble after trouble after pain, anything to break you, to get you to the point where you come back and you go, God, he'll do it. And that's what this is a picture of. Amen? God is faithful.
Yes, he is.
So they end up outside the city. Sometimes the Lord forces us to move. Sometimes he forces situations that, though painful and not what we want, are in fact God being merciful to us. You see, it says here, the men seized Lot and his wife and his 2 daughters by the hand. They didn't go, let me have your hand, Lot. They were like, give me your hand, and drag them out. And that was the mercy of God on this family.
And the verse you gave us in Samuel just backed that up.
Yep.
Can't be taken by force, by the force of men.
Yep. Yeah. So left to his own devices, Lot would have lingered past the time and would have died in the rain of sulfur and fire along with his family. And being warned, had he lingered and not been physically prevented, then Lot would have also gotten what he deserved. Not a single person sits here tonight saved because you deserve it.
You're right, brother. That's so true.
You made a decision.
Yes, I did.
To follow God.
Amen to that, brother.
And even that decision doesn't save you. That's not the saving act. It's God dispensing his grace on you. That's the saving act. You are saved by grace through faith. Amen?
Amen.
New Testament and the Old Testament once again.
Amen to that, brother.
And that's all being portrayed here in the story of Lot and his wife and his family and the angels. This is a salvation story. You see, remember I asked at the beginning, this is a story about the judgment, the final judgment. The New Testament confirms this. So the saving here speaks of God's grace in New Testament terms through the Old Testament. Right? I could go ahead and say that, what does the Bible tell us about you being saved? There's nothing in you that's good. Nothing in you would warrant your turning to God. He seized you.
Yes, he draws himself. You're right, brother.
And in his seizing you, you turned to God. And you made a decision for God. And he dispensed his grace on you.
Amen.
See, that's what's being portrayed here.
Amen.
So that now when the sulfur and brimstone rains down, you are saved.
Amen.
But one of those people,
Turn back.
yeah, and there's another sermon for another day. Because now we're talking about once saved, always saved. So was Lot's wife ever a believer? Because I'm going to give you a little taste of it now. She didn't turn because she missed her sons-in-laws. She turned because she was missing Sodom. All right? All right, let's move on. Sometimes our hesitancy to take action is sin. Sometimes it indicates that we are complicit, that we are accomplices to sin which is being judged. When we hesitate and God forces us to be saved anyway, that is mercy. That is grace. And it's not getting what we deserve, that's mercy, and getting what we don't deserve is grace. See, not getting what you deserve is being spared from hell.
Yes.
But that doesn't mean he's got to put you in heaven. He could just put you in the twilight zone, some other state. But he takes you out of hell and places you positionally into the family of God so that you can have heaven. So not giving you the wrath is mercy. Giving you salvation is grace.
Amen. I like that, brother. It's true.
All right? More New Testament stuff being portrayed here in the Old Testament. As they brought them out, one said, "Escape for your life. Do not look back or stop anywhere in the valley. Escape to the hills, lest you be swept away." Now, I could say, well, that's some good advice, huh? But it's more than good advice. It's actually commands of God that have ramifications of being obeyed or being disobeyed. As Lot's wife, if she could speak, would testify of. All she did was turn back, which is what they said don't do. All right, let's keep going. This is the good stuff. Got a half hour. One of the angels addresses all present, Lot, his wife, and his 2 daughters, giving them 3 points of instruction and commands from God. 1, escape for your life. Again, this is said with emphasis. It's emphatic. He's not just saying it to them. He's yelling it at them with energy and necessity, right? Escape for your life. Do not linger. Do not walk slowly. Quickly get away from here. Second one, do not look back. The suggestion is to not hesitate in your desire to flee the things which are causing this judgment. Did you hear me? The suggestion is not to hesitate in your desire to flee the things which are causing this judgment. In a higher spiritual sense, it is a teaching to us. Here's the New Testament in the Old Testament being portrayed in this. This is a story picture, all right? Instruction. When we repent, when we put away our sinful pasts, behaviors, likes, etc., to escape for our life, do not look back. All right? Do not stop anywhere in the valley. It's the third one. Take no breaks. Do not stop until you're out of the valley. Christian, New Testament. You have much you have repented of. Consider yourself dead to your sinful past, and on your walk to holiness, to the heights out of the valley, on your walk to holiness, do not stop anywhere in the places, thoughts, and actions where your sin thrived, the valley, lest you open yourself up to temptation and a great fall. Do you remember when God left Abraham, the 2 angels left for Sodom, and then Abraham walked God out, and they stopped at a peak overlooking the valley, and he could see Sodom in the distance. I mean, to me, this speaks of Abraham being in a place of being a true God follower, whereas Lot kind of had his feet half in and half out. I mean, Lot was righteous. The Bible says that. But his wife wasn't righteous. His daughters had much to be desired. And even Lot was imperfect. You know, it shows varying degrees of compromise that came from their staying in Sodom. And so when they say, don't look back and don't stop anywhere in the valley and it's saying, don't stop until you're out of the valley, until you have gotten to the heights. And it's speaking of our former lives, our former sins, our former behaviors, our former actions. They will not serve you in any constructive way in Christianity. Rich.
Yeah, Jesus told the Jews to flee for the hills when Jerusalem was going to be destroyed. You know?
And I'm going to quote you from the New Testament in just a moment.
Can I just say one thing before you do that?
No more. Go ahead.
So, in addition to the sins and looking back, you know what struck me about Lot's wife turning back, maybe she was turning back because she wanted to go back to Sodom, but maybe she was looking back, thinking about her daughters or whatever, if that was the case. But in doing so, she's disobeying God. And, you know, what did Jesus say? You have to hate your parents or your children and love me more, meaning that you need to put me even before your family. And sometimes I think we don't just turn away because of sin, but we turn away because of idolatry, where we're putting children above Jesus.
Well, that's still sin. That's still sin.
Huh?
That's still sin.
Well, I know, but sometimes we look at sin as, you know, these evil things.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, you're right.
And that's my point, is it doesn't even have to be that you're turning back towards something evil or prohibitive. It could be turning away from God or making something else more important than him. That's all.
Yep. I'm looking for a verse that I have in my study here. Man, I don't know. Okay. All right. So, in light of what Nancy just said, Pastor Nancy just said, all right, about why might she have turned back, I'm going to jump ahead to this right now. Luke chapter 17, verse 28 to 33. Likewise, just as it was in the days of Lot, when they were eating and drinking, buying and selling, planting and building, but on the day when Lot went out from Sodom, fire and sulfur rained from heaven and destroyed them all. So will it be on the day when the Son of Man is revealed. On that day, let the one who is on the housetop with his goods in the house not come down to take them away. And likewise, let the one who is in the field not turn back. Remember Lot's wife. So she is being given to us by Jesus as an example of what not to do, of sinful action. Now, I don't know. I kind of think that if she was looking back, hoping to see her daughters and sons-in-laws, I don't know that God would have smote her for that. But if she was looking back to Sodom, you know, because what it says in Luke, prior to saying, remember Lot's wife, it says, on that day, let the one who is on the housetop with his goods in his house, right? So that's talking about the stuff you got, not come down to take them away. It's speaking to the desire, the longing for the good things that we had in Sodom when it's applied to Lot's wife, which it is because it's saying, remember Lot's wife. So I tend to think that it was more of her looking back at Sodom and what she's, like, maybe it's not all destroyed, maybe we can go back, kind of thing, as opposed to, where are my sons-in-laws? And so that's my 2 cents, Nancy. Well, yeah, it's just that Jesus in the New Testament uses this chapter in Genesis to talk to us about materialism and not being concerned about the things that we have when that day comes, that we should just run for the hills.
Amen to that, brother.
All right?
Come on up and leave with nothing.
I mean, you know, the sons-in-laws and daughter, they're not even brought up.
Makes sense.
Yeah. But I have that in my notes as well, because I did think about that, you know. All right, so Philippians, and the New Testament kind of testifies to what, how my take and what Jesus was telling us in Luke. Philippians 3:8-11. Let me read this. I count everything as loss because of the surpassing worth of knowing Christ Jesus my Lord. This is the Apostle Paul. The Apostle Paul was a wealthy man. He was an up-and-coming Pharisee. He was a Pharisee of Pharisees. He was a young Pharisee who was known as being a smart up-and-comer. So he was living the life of the aristocracy. He was wealthy. He had much, all right? So he left a lot to become a follower of Christ. I count everything as loss because of the surpassing worth of knowing Christ Jesus my Lord. For his sake I have suffered the loss of all things and count them as rubbish in order that I may gain Christ and be found in him, not having a righteousness of my own that comes from the law, but that which comes through faith in Christ, the righteousness from God that depends on faith, that I may know him and the power of his resurrection. Isn't that what we all want? Don't we all want to know the power of the new life? We all have the new life, but we often don't walk in the power of the new life because we still have these flawed meat bodies. But that doesn't mean that we can't grow in faith and strength and wisdom and become the overcomers that ultimately we will be. Getting me riled up, folks. All right, that by any means possible, let me read this again. That I may know him and the power of his resurrection and may share his sufferings, becoming like him in his death, that by any means possible I may attain the resurrection from the dead. Man, that I would have that kind of faith. Maybe I do. My life's not at stake right now. But if that day comes, may I be found to have that kind of faith. And I believe, just like all the martyrs, if you ever want to read about the Christian martyrs, read Fox's Book of the Martyrs. And it'll tell you about all the people who died because of the cross, because they wouldn't deny their faith. And I believe that for the true believer, that the Holy Spirit will empower us in that moment to stand. 2 Peter 1:19b 2 Peter 2:19b through 22. For whatever overcomes a person, to that he is enslaved. For if, after they have escaped the defilements of the world, through the knowledge of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, I'm relating this to Lot leaving Sodom, and them being told not to look back, that they're being delivered out of judgment. Of course, remember, that's what we're talking about here. Into grace. And this is the warning. If they have escaped the defilements of the world through the knowledge of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, they are again entangled in them and overcome. They look back. The last state has become worse for them than the first. I think we could say that about the pillar of salt known as Lot's wife. 2 Peter 2:19 through 22. For it would have been better for them to never have known the way of righteousness than after knowing it to turn back from the holy commandment delivered to them. What the true proverb says has happened to them. The dog returns to its own vomit, and the sow, after washing herself, returns to wallow in the mud. Man, right in your face, right? Romans 6 through 8. We know that our old self was crucified with him in order that the body of sin might be brought to nothing, so that we would no longer be enslaved to sin. For one who has died has been set free from sin. Now, if we have died with Christ, we believe that we will also live with him. Now I'm going to jump to verse 11 in chapter 6. So you also must consider yourselves dead to sin and alive to God in Christ Jesus. Consider yourself that. In other words, even if you don't feel it, consider yourselves that. Even if you messed up again, consider yourselves that. Keep telling yourself you are walking towards holiness. And keep doing positive things for your faith. Bible study, prayer, worship, all those things. And I promise you, you will be walking upward, not downward. All right? Do not present your members, let not sin therefore reign in your mortal body to make you obey its passions. Do not present your members to sin as instruments for unrighteousness, but present yourselves to God as those who have been brought from death to life, and your members to God as instruments for righteousness. For sin will have no dominion over you, since you are not under law, but under grace. Hallelujah. All right, verse 18. Oh, that's new. All right, who wants to read 18 to 22? Actually, why don't I start reading just for time's sake, because I really want to try to finish this chapter tonight. And Lot said to them, "Oh no, my lords, behold, your servant has found favor in your sight, and you have shown me great kindness in saving my life. But I cannot escape to the hills, lest the disaster overtake me and I die. Behold, this city is near enough to flee to, and it is a little one. Let me escape there. Is it not a little one? And my life will be saved." And he said to him, "Behold, I grant you this favor also, that I will not overthrow the city of which you have spoken. Escape there quickly, for I can do nothing till you arrive there." Therefore, the name of the city was called Zoar. So Lot negotiates and gets his way. Right? He does. This city was on the list. That's what the scripture's telling us. I grant you a favor. I won't destroy the city. I will not overthrow the city of which you have spoken. In other words, I was going to, but I'm not going to. I'm going to do you a favor and spare it so you can go there. Which tells me this city is also inhabited by a people in sin, first, but it's also a smaller city. So for the sake of the one, it was spared. Remember the negotiations Abraham had with God? It was a smaller city. So for one, he saved it.
Praise God.
Verse 19. I cannot escape to the hills lest the disaster overtake me and I die. Really? Really, Lot? You've walked all the way from Ur of the Chaldees, for crying out loud, to Egypt, up to here, and now you're telling me you can't climb yourself out of a valley. Right? No. We know he can. He walked far to get where he is today. It seems he wanted city life. That's what he wanted. rather than to start over in the woods in a countryside. Verse 20. Being a small city, Lot likely was supposing and offering that they weren't as bad as Sodom. Well, they weren't. But are we going to consider quality or quantity? They were less in number, so quantity-wise, they were less than Sodom. But if they were going to overthrow that city too, obviously those same sins are happening there. All right? It seems this small city was slated for the same judgment as Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, and Zeboim. And this conclusion is arrived at from the angel's response to Lot in saying they're going to grant him a favor and not overthrow it. The city being spared is being done as a favor to Lot, not because it deserved to be spared. And this makes sense, as if the city was close in proximity to Sodom, as were Gomorrah, Admah, and Zeboim. It would make sense that it was influenced by the same sinful behaviors to some degree. That's why we don't look back.
It seems to show
the angels have some type of authority. Because God said certain time, and now they took it upon themselves to give out a favor. And
well, but who's to say they're not in direct communication with God?
Right, yeah, I thought that too.
You know what I mean? Yeah. That he's not seeing through their eyes and hearing through their ears, because he's everywhere, you know? So escape there quickly, verse 22, for I can do nothing till you arrive there. All right, so I can do nothing till you arrive there tells me that God wanted them to spare Lot and his family. He did not want the judgment to rain down before they arrived at Zoar. All right? Zoar, by the way, means little. So, having been commissioned by God to not destroy, not to rain down, because now the power is coming through the word of the angels saying, let it begin. Right? That's what's being said here. It may be coming from heaven, but they're the angels who are instituting it through God. And it's saying that he doesn't want them doing this until Lot and his family get to Zoar, and yet Lot's wife is lost. So that talks to me about predestination and free will. They were predestined to go to Zoar and be spared. That was God's will, and yet their will, the will of one of them anyway, caused her own destruction. And that's Lot's wife. Does everybody see that?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so verse 23. The sun had risen on the earth when Lot came to Zoar. Then the Lord rained on Sodom and Gomorrah sulfur and fire from the Lord out of heaven. And he overthrew those cities and all the valley and all the inhabitants of the cities and what grew on the ground. But Lot's wife, behind him, looked back, and she became a pillar of salt. So all of this took place over the course of an evening, lasting throughout the night, with Lot and his family's arrival at Zoar at sunrise. Okay? So this all happened very quickly, is what I'm saying. All of this took place... Oh, I read that. So at sunrise, the wrath begins. And it's beginning with their arrival at Zoar. And now, judging by it saying, but Lot's wife behind him looked back and she became a pillar of salt, tells me they are on the road to Zoar at Zoar, not in Zoar. You see? If they're in Zoar, then she wouldn't be able to look back and see the city. There'd be buildings blocking her view. So at some point before that went out of view, Sodom, she looked back to Sodom. All kinds of speculation I can make about that, New Testament-wise, about, you can be saved up until the last second, and you can be lost up until the last second, right? Sulfur and fire, which is fire and brimstone, and let's be clear, God was the cause of it, the manifestation of his wrath. It literally was caused by the peoples of the area. What makes God just in his killing of all those people in the cities is several things. First, he is creator of all, including the people. And therefore, he has the right to command us to live in accordance to his will and to judge right from wrong. As creator, it is God's prerogative to establish an absolute standard of morality which is non-negotiable. What he says is right, and what he says is wrong is wrong. He even determines what is and is not negotiable and when it will be or not be negotiable. All right? It's not to say he'll never negotiate with you, but there are certain things he won't. There's certain things he will, and what he determines in any negotiation is his prerogative. Because he's the sovereign, not you. Amen. Not me, not Perry. Not me neither, brother. Love you, Perry. It is God's prerogative also to therefore establish punishments and rewards. From the mild to the severe, on both ends of the spectrum of right and wrong, good and bad, reward and penalty, based on his absolute moral standards and his knowledge, his the omniscience, his all-knowingness. Verse 25, he overthrew the cities, and as the angel stated, the cities, material and flesh in the cities, were destroyed and swept away, as promised in verse 13 and 17. In verse 6, we have a tragedy. Lot's wife looks back. Lot's wife is behind him. I got a problem with that. If I'm the father, if I'm the husband and I'm the father, and they said don't look back, it's a dilemma. Are you going to lead the way, or are you going to stay behind to make sure nobody looks back? But God emphasizes by putting it in here, but Lot's wife behind him. In other words, he couldn't see if she turned around. So he couldn't stop her from turning around because none of them were looking back.
Well, wait. How would he stop her? By the time she turns, he realizes she's turned. If he, okay, hypothetically, he's behind her, saying, "Don't turn back," and she goes to turn. How is he going to stop her?
Well, he sees her starting to turn. He yells, whatever. There's a name for her, Erith. I think that was one of the names they think her name was. Erith, stop! I'm sorry, Lot. I was gonna. Don't turn around. Oi, keep going. Of course that would have to happen. Of course that would have to happen in a millisecond. But I'm not saying it's not possible. I'm just saying that he wasn't behind her. See, the Bible is telling us intentionally he was not able to see her. She was behind him, and she looked back.
So maybe sparing him of seeing his wife get,
I don't think it's about Lot. I think it's about his wife. The point here isn't that Lot this or Lot that. The point is his wife looked back. All right, and that's a tragedy. She looks back towards Sodom, directly breaking the command given by the angel in verse 17. It was God's command. Now, Lot had finally, and the family had finally came to Zoar in verse 23, but the language indicates they had not yet taken shelter anywhere and were likely on the road into the city, about to enter therein, when she looked back. And the Targums of Jonathan and the Targum of Jerusalem write that her name, here it is, was either Adith or Erith. Where they got that from is beyond me. Lot's wife looks back towards Sodom. She walked behind Lot. Lot should have had them all walking ahead of him as to stop them before they looked back, should they seem to do so. Now, could he have? One thing's for sure, in being ahead of her, he couldn't. That we know for sure. Could he have if he were behind them? Possibly, possibly not. All right? Why?
Maybe.
What's that?
Maybe he was dragging her.
No, he wasn't. Why did she look back? It wasn't.
I mean, trying to say, don't turn around. I got to pull you in. Come on.
I don't think she looked back because her daughters were still with them, the sons-in-law.
Oh, no, she didn't do that.
I don't think that would have been breaking the command because she wouldn't have been looking back for the wrong reason. All right? I could be wrong. I don't know. But that seems, if she was looking for her sons-in-law, that would have, I don't know. But maybe like Nancy said, even putting the kids above God is a sin. So maybe that was enough. I don't know.
Can I chime in here?
Yeah, you sure can. I'm just trying to get through the chapter before tonight's over.
I'll be really fast.
Okay.
Just made me think of, look at this one simple thing not to do. Don't turn back.
Yep.
The one simple thing. It's just like, don't eat from that one tree in the garden.
Yep.
And, it's our sin nature that we're talked about, where Paul talks about, that we're given one law and that our sin nature is going to go to break it. And it just goes to show that that sin nature is alive in all of us, and that's the thing that we have to look out for. Anyway, that's it.
Yeah, and every deviation from the path is very small. But if not immediately caught and corrected, that small deviation leads you away from that path. You're off the path immediately, but it leads you further and further and further away. All right? So she, I believe she was looking back out of longing. Longing for the material wealth in Sodom. Longing for the city life and culture of the city. Having a desire for it in spite of the sinful actions and beliefs which were a part of the culture, even if she did not directly participate in them. And she became, go ahead.
A commandment may have just been for her. Maybe that was a test and a knowledge that got out of her.
Certainly it was for all of them, but God knew. So that was a last plea to her to check herself, you know. So it's a picture of Judgment Day, why she became a pillar of salt. What is that trying to teach us? And for that I have the scriptures that I read to you from Luke 17:28-33. You know, on that day when Lot went out from Sodom, fire and sulfur rained from heaven, destroyed them all. So it will be on the day when the Son of Man is revealed. This is about Judgment Day. This chapter. And all your interpretation has to be done through the lens of the second coming of Christ. All right? On that day, let no one who's on the housetop with his goods in the house not come down to take them away. When you become a believer in Christ, don't look back. Don't try to keep some of the things of the world with you. They're going to, you know, you're going to find as you live in the Lord, things will fall away. Don't try to hold on to them. It'll be people, it'll be relationships, it'll be things, it'll be thoughts, it'll be behaviors, all kinds of things of the old life, right? Remember Lot's wife. And then check this out. Verse 33 of 17 of Luke. Whoever seeks to preserve his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life will keep it. What does salt do? It's a preservative. Her being turned into a pillar of salt is a picture of her trying to preserve her old life. That's the picture. That's why a pillar of salt. All right? The salt in the case of Lot's wife represents that which is used as a preservative. The implication between Lot's wife here in Genesis 19 and the words of the Lord through Luke that we just read are quite clear. She wished to preserve her former lifestyle, her former life in Sodom, and suffered the consequences. She was judged, and the wrath of God fell upon her. She is the one in Luke who was on the housetop, at least figuratively, with her goods in her house, who at that point looked back, longing for them. She is the one who was in the field in Luke, looking to hold on to some of the grain that she was harvesting, right? In looking back at Sodom, figuratively, she's those things. To see some sign that her old life was recoverable. That in her walk of faith, that her old ways could be preserved. The message for us, do not look back to your former life. Do not long for your former life. Those who seek to preserve their past sinful lives will lose their eternal lives, their eternal soul. All right, and that is from the last verse from Luke. I'll repeat it. Whoever seeks to preserve his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life will keep it. And that's what Lot's wife is the picture of. Now, historical note, Josephus, he lived in AD 37 through 100, reports that this pillar continued in his time, was still there. Irenaeus lived in 130 to 202 AD, and Tertullian, who lived in 155 to 220 AD, both of these men wrote that they saw this pillar. Benjamin of Tudela, who was a medieval Jewish traveler who took notes, he lived in 1130 to 1173, wrote that it stood in his time 5 miles from the Sea of Sodom. And though the flocks were continually licking it, it grew again to its former size. And that sounds kind of like a myth to me, but who knows, right? So in verse 27 and 28, Abraham witnesses the destruction of the cities as it occurs. Verse 29, so it was when God destroyed the cities of the valley, God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out in the midst of the overthrow when he overthrew the cities which Lot had lived. And what's the moral of that verse? God is faithful. He does not renege on his promises. All right? So we get to verses 30 through 38. And do you want me to continue? This is 5 minutes. All right? All right. So now Lot went up out of Zoar and lived in the hills with his 2 daughters, for he was afraid to live in Zoar. So he lived in a cave with his 2 daughters, which I find ridiculous considering he negotiated for Zoar. You know what I think happened? I think he found the fear of God. When Lot's wife turned around and turned into a pillar of salt, he saw himself in Lot's wife. And he said, you know what? I think we should go to the country. Right? Doesn't that make sense? And the firstborn said to the younger, they lived in a cave with his 2 daughters. The firstborn said to the younger, our father is old, and there is not a man on earth to come into us after the manner of all the earth. Come, let us make our father drink wine, and we will lie with him, that we may preserve offspring from our father. Now, can anyone else raise their hand and say, that is so stupid? There are still men on planet Earth, folks. They're just making an excuse because there's not a man within a 5-mile walk. All right? They have been influenced by Sodom. That's what this is showing us. The depravity they have picked up from associating with the sinful. This is why we can't. We live here, but we're not to be a part of here.
Amen. We're in a world without.
If we associate with sinners, we will become sinners. Now, I'm not saying you got to shun all people. What I'm saying is that your goal here is to be a testimony, an example of Christ, not to be a participant in those who you are trying to win for Christ.
You're right. You be just as bad as they were, brother.
Exactly.
It's like separate yourself from the wicked, from the evil. That's what it's all about, brother.
Yeah.
Light and darkness. Separate. We are among them, but we're not be of them.
Yes.
Separation.
So these are the 2 daughters who are the daughters that he was going to give to the gay man. All right. And Lot, as we already went over, might have had other daughters, but we can't really say for sure. I don't know. All right. So our father is old, and there's not a man on earth to come into us after the manner of the earth. In other words, sexual intercourse. This is an untruth. Lot is old, but there are still men left on the earth, and we already went over that. There can be just one conclusion. Lot's daughter's thinking was poisoned by the immoral philosophy and behaviors of Sodom and Gomorrah, and that they devised this immoral and depraved plan to become impregnated by their own father, which is called incest.
It could have been H, brother Chris.
They what?
It could have been H. I don't want to say the word. I can say it. It could have been horny.
Yes.
I was thinking too, brother. Maybe.
I'm sure that played a part of it as well. Come, let us make our father drink wine. We will lie with him that we may preserve offspring from our father. So they made their father drink wine that night, and the firstborn went in and lay with her father. He did not know when she lay down or when she arose. He was blotto. So much for new wine. Right? Clearly alcoholic wine. And he was blotto. And God does not hold him accountable. All right? For this. So he apparently really was blotto. All right? Because really, if he remembered, either he's a really bad sinner because he just plays along because he's going to get it from his other daughter. But if he is this righteous man, he would repent and he would not be getting drunk the second night. All right? It's really a crazy, I don't like this set of scriptures. It's just very depraved in my, everything about it is just dirty, The next day the firstborn said to the younger, behold, I lay last night with my father. Let us make him drink wine tonight also. Then you go in and lie with him, that we may preserve offspring from our father. So they made their father drink wine that night also. And the younger arose and lay with him, and he did not know when she lay down or when she arose. Thus both daughters of Lot became pregnant by their father. The firstborn bore a son and called his name Moab. He is the father of the Moabites to this day. The younger also bore a son and called his name Ben-Ami. He is the father of the Ammonites to this day. So the plan, the two daughters hatch. Get dad drunk and rape him. That's what they're doing. They are mimicking the sin of Sodom. Dressing up the pig. Exactly. So what's the fruit of that dressing up of the pig? Does it produce godly fruit? It produces two of the races in Canaan that God commands Israel to go in and utterly destroy when Israel enters the promised land. The Moabites and the Ammonites. Go ahead, Ken.
I know this is not necessarily relevant to what we're talking about.
Then please, I'm trying to end Bible study. Go ahead. All right. What?
Well, in the movie, the first Raiders of the Lost Ark, when they get ready to open up the Ark, it said "Don't look back." He tells Karen Allen, "Don't look back." Whatever you do, because they open up the Ark.
Yes.
And
yeah, you're right. All right. So the wine was alcoholic. They got the father blotto 2 nights in a row. And this happens. Both get pregnant. The Moabites and the Ammonites, they birth both of these people that become long-standing enemies of Israel in the Old Testament, that are pagan, that do child sacrifice. All right? And that is it. Amen. Who wants to pray us out? Go ahead, Gail.
Lord, we thank you for tonight's study, and we thank you for all that you are teaching us through Pastor Chris. And Lord, we pray that we might follow what we've learned tonight, that we might never look back at our past or long for our former lives, but instead long for a continued walk with you, Lord, because we look for the eternal life that you have gained for us. And we are already seated in heavenly places, and that's where we want to stay, Lord. And we ask you to protect us on our way home, Lord, and bring us back together again Sunday, where we can worship you in spirit and in truth. And we ask this in the name of Jesus, your Son. Amen.
And please give Ken and his wife a good vacation, Lord, and keep them safe and bring them back safely in the name of Jesus. So God bless you all. Have a good night. God bless you on Facebook and Zoom. Thank you for being here.
Praise the Lord. Love you guys. God bless you all.
Good night, everybody.